Hello and welcome back to Kim's Cozy Corner. I'm Kim and today we are going to talk about part 2 of what seeds to start in April. Come with me and let's get started. Welcome back. I'm glad you could join me. I live in Zone 6A, which is Southwest Ohio, and my last frost date on paper, it says it's the end of this month, but I typically wait until early May when I decide to put my plants in, so my summer plants into the ground. So I am less than 4 weeks out from that, and I want to make sure that I'm actually transplanting into the ground versus putting seeds, because I want that 2 to 3 week jump on the production and my harvest. So we are in part 2 of my what to start in April video. So we are going to talk about 2 varieties of vegetables, just like we did last time, but I'm only going to talk about 2 varieties because I want to try to keep this video as short as I possibly can, but I want to provide for you lots of great information as you're making your decisions on what you want to start in April, or even what you want to grow from a summer vegetable standpoint. So that's what I want this video to do for you. The 2 areas that we're going to talk about have to deal with squash and melons. Let's talk about squash first. There are 2 types of squash. There is what we call winter squash, and pumpkins fall within the winter squash realm, as well as what we call summer squash. So let's do winter squash first. Winter squash, again, like I said, includes your pumpkins and your butternut. It also includes acorn squash, delicata squash, all of those squash that produce really large fruits. I've grown a lot of different winter squash, but I am going to limit my winter squash to just 4 varieties this year. I will be growing what's called a mashed potato. So this is from Harris Seeds. There's no picture, so I'm going to provide a picture for you right here. And this particular squash is a bright white color. So the outside of the squash, when it's mature, will be white. And inside, the flesh is nearly white. It's about 1 to 1.5 pounds when it's ready to harvest. And the vine isn't that large, so it's more of a restrictive vine. And I hear it tastes like mashed potatoes. We will see with this one. Never grown it before, but it looked very interesting on the Harris Seed website. The next 2 I attempted to grow last year, and I got one. I'm not going to mess it up because I will, but this one's out of China. The vines for this one were beautiful. They grew up a trellis, over the trellis, down the trellis, into my neighbor's backyard, around the corner, around the other beds. It vined forever, but it took it too long to get started. So my season ended before I had all but one to ripen. And we did get one to ripen, and my neighbors said it was delicious. They said it reminded them of an acorn squash. Now, I didn't get to taste it, but my neighbors loved it. It's about 3 to 8 pounds, and the one we harvested was about 3 to 8 pounds, and it says superior flavor. So my neighbor said acorn squash. Well, we're gonna grow this one again, and by me starting earlier and transplanting versus starting from seeds, I'm hoping that we'll get a better harvest this year. The other one, and you have to forgive me about the condition of this pack, but when you're in the garden working, you know how dirty hands and dirt gets on everything, but this is a buttercup squash. Now, I heard buttercup squash tastes very similar to sweet potatoes. This particular buttercup squash is from M.I. Gardner. This one very similar to the last one. I planted it too late and I didn't get a harvest on this one. I had some small fruit, but they never had time to ripen. So I'm going to make sure I give them plenty of time to ripen. Now, granted, I got my seeds very late in the season because I hadn't heard of buttercup squash until late in the season. So I got a late start. This year we'll have an early start. It says it's 85 days to maturity. The buttercup is smooth and buttery. It's a great alternative to mashed sweet potatoes. Everybody says this tastes just like sweet potatoes. So we will get to see this year if it tastes like sweet potatoes or not. And the last winter squash that I'm growing this year, I know it tastes like sweet potatoes because I've been getting this particular winter squash from Azure Standard all through the summer. I mean, I've purchased it through Azure Standard, I know at least 4 or 5 times, but it's called the Australian butter squash. I actually purchased these seeds as well from Azure Standard. This particular squash is a rare Australian heirloom squash. It's creamy and buttery tasting, not to mention very sweet. The fruit weighs between 6 and 12 pounds. And typically when I ordered this from Azure Standard, I never got a whole fruit. I got 3 pounds, typically, which was half of a fruit or a quarter of a fruit. So I do believe these get pretty large. These are absolutely delicious. If I can get these to grow, great. If I can't, I guess I'm gonna have to order them from Azure Standard. Those are the only winter squash I'll be growing. I honestly don't like the taste of most winter squash. I don't like the taste of pumpkin. I don't like the taste of acorn squash. So I'm trying to find different winter varieties that I do like the taste of so we can increase the palate for my family on what they're willing to eat and what they're willing to try so I can grow more options in my garden. For the summer squash, I have quite a few varieties there. Let's start with yellow summer squash. For the yellow summer squash, I'm going to do 2 different kinds. I'm going to do the crook neck yellow squash. I'm also going to do this early prolific summer squash. The only difference in the two, one has a crook neck and bumpy skin, and the other is a more smooth skin. But these are the 2 yellow summer squash that I'll be growing. But I'm also going to grow a yellow or golden zucchini, a traditional zucchini, but is gold in color. Now, all of the squash that I've talked about so far are on bush plants, and they get pretty large. You really need a 3-foot by 3-foot space for the ones that I'm talking about so far. I find the yellow zucchini has a milder, more buttery taste than your traditional green zucchinis. And of course, I will do one traditional green zucchini, which would be the Fort Hook zucchini. It freezes well though, so I usually get way too many zucchini and I'm always looking for something to do with them. So being able to freeze them will be a plus. And then I'm gonna do some zucchini it's not really even zucchini, to be honest with you. I will be doing these 2 here, and I'm gonna put both of them up at the same time. So these are like a ball, round shaped summer squash. They're green like zucchini, but I find them to have a much better taste than zucchini. This one I grew last year. It's out of Argentina. It can be eaten as a winter squash or a summer squash. Now, it never made it to a winter squash for me. We ate it when it was young, it was tender, and it tastes so great that all I did was cut it up and dip it in like ranch dressing, and I snacked on it just like that. This is also called an avocado squash because it has very low moisture in it. And so when you cook it, it doesn't get all smushy, which is another reason why I really like this one. Last year, I put some of these in some of my grow bags. It did well. And I also put this one in my GreenStalk. And I harvested quite a few of these off of my GreenStalk last year. This other one here is very similar to the one we just talked about. But instead of being out of Argentina, this is an Italian heirloom. It just says that these are rich, dark green, round, and very flavorful. So I believe it should be very close to the other one, but we will determine that when they come in this year from a harvest standpoint. And then I will be growing 2 what I call patty pans. So here's a white patty pan that I'll be growing, or a white scallop. Some people call them scallops, some people call them patty pans. But this is an ancient Native American type squash, one of the best tasting and high yielding varieties around, and is very beautiful. And so a white scallop or a white patty pan. And then I will be growing a green patty pan or scallop squash. And so this is from Johnny's, and Johnny's is one of our companies that don't provide pictures. Now these patty pans or scallop squash, I like to pick them, when they're about this big. I don't let them get massive. I picked them about this big, and again, I would just slice them up and eat them fresh. I would saute them. Again, I think it had a better taste than traditional zucchini, so much better than a Black Beauty. I think it had a better taste than the Ford Hook as well. I just don't find traditional zucchini to have a really good taste, and then they're so watery. So the patty pan was delicious in the garden last year. And the last item that I'll be starting from a squash standpoint, or a summer squash standpoint, is the Kozy. I don't know how you say that. However you say that right there, I'm going to grow that right there. I've seen it in other gardens. It gets really big compared to like a traditional zucchini. Have no idea how it's going to taste. No, I have no information on this one. It was just pretty. I've seen it in other gardens. I hear that it tastes really well. It is, I believe, an Italian summer squash, but there's no information on here. But we will grow it. We will give it a try. That's all of the summer and winter squash that I'll be growing this year. And now let's move over into melons. So I have yet to have great success growing melons in my garden. Last year, I probably did better than I ever have from getting them to grow and produce fruit. But I was only able to harvest just a couple. For my melons, I got a late start. That's why I'm starting them now, so that I can get them into the garden already having some growth on them. So hopefully they'll take off and we'll have longer time to get them to produce. I did grow some melons in my GreenStalk last year, and I was able to get some of the melons to ripen to maturity, but I just happened to be on vacation when they ripened, and I had a coworker taking care of my garden for me, making sure that it was watered and had everything that it needed. And my coworker thought that the squirrels had got to my melons, and so she picked it up, she took it home, and she said that she was going to save the seeds so she could grow melons in her garden this year. And she tasted the flesh and she said it was delicious. And she found it on the ground next to the GreenStalk. What she didn't realize was that for melons, especially like cantaloupes, a cantaloupe is ripe when it comes off of the vine. And so that particular melon had fallen off of the vine and was laying next to the GreenStalk where it had been growing. So she was able to enjoy my first ever cantaloupe for my garden. She said it was delicious, so I know we can do it again. So let's talk about cantaloupes first. Since that one, we were able to get a melon all the way through to harvest, and from what I understand, it tasted delicious. Honey Rock is a traditional cantaloupe that we'll be growing. I didn't get to harvest this one. We ran out of time in the season. There are 80 days to harvest on this one. So we'll make sure that we get this one started early. The Honey Rock is a heavy netted cantaloupe with rich, sweet flesh. The Honey Rock fruit size is 3 to 4 pounds. This fruit right here is so dirty you might not be able to read it. This particular fruit is the one that I grew in my GreenStalk last year, and we were able to harvest it. It's 85 days to maturity, and this is an heirloom Delice de la Table. And I know I said it wrong. Delice de la Table. It's a very small fruit too. It's out of France. It says here that it only grows about 3 to 7 fruits per plant. And they don't get very large. They're like personal size cantaloupes, only 1 to 2 pounds. And then the last, what I call orange flesh type fruit, so I put those all in the cantaloupe family, and I'm sure they're not, is this Prescott Fond Blanc. And if I had had maybe 3 more weeks, I would have had one of these to maturity as well. Now this one takes 85 to 95 days to maturity, so we absolutely need to start it now. It's also a French variety as well. It looks more like a squash because if you look at the skin of it there, it's kind of bumpy and rough looking, more like a winter squash. But it's filled with some of the sweetest cantaloupe fruit you'll ever taste, according to this. The Prescott fruit size is 3 to 5 pounds. And you only get about 4 melons per plant on this. So again, it doesn't produce a lot, but the few fruit they do produce, if you can get them to maturity, from my understanding, they taste amazing. The first known market for this one was back in 1883, so it's been around a long time. That's it from my cantaloupe or orange flesh melons. And I tried to grow honeydew last year, and so this is the honeydew that I grew. For the honeydew, it takes 90 days to maturity. So again, I'm in Southwest Ohio. I'm in zone 6A, which means that my grow season is not that long from my last frost to my first frost. So if I don't get a jump start on my transplants, they're not going to have time to produce in the amount of time available, especially if I get an early frost on the back end or a late frost on the front end. So starting them indoors is a must, especially with a 90-day to maturity time frame. The honeydew fruit size is 3 to 4 pounds, and it produces 3 to 5 fruits per plant. Again, not a lot of fruit per plant. So I need to have a whole bunch out there going for me, and hopefully we'll get a couple. When it comes to melon, I'm not an expert. I'm still trying to figure it out. I've grown them in raised beds. I've grown them in my GreenStalk. I've grown them in grow pots. I've grown them in regular pots. I will figure out the best way to grow a melon, and you will be right here with me when I do figure it out. The last type of melon that I will attempt to grow this year are watermelons. And last year I grew like 6 different types of watermelon, and I only got one to maturity, and that was the sugar baby. And so we're going to stick with the sugar baby again this year. The sugar baby, in my mind, is the personal size fruit for anyone. The days to maturity is 75. One plant produces 2 to 5 melons. A lot of people say that they're perfect from an individual size. So you don't have to share your sugar baby. You can eat it all by yourself. The fruit size is about 8 to 12 pounds. Now, with that being 8 to 12 pounds, that might be a little bit more than one person can eat. Okay, I guess you can share it with one person then. My sugar babies didn't get that big. I mean, maybe it was because I started them late, or maybe they were stunted in size, but it did ripen, but it was not that large. But if I can get an 8 to 12 pound fruit off of my sugar baby, then I'll share it with at least one other person. And the last watermelon that I will be starting is called Moon and Stars. So this Moon and Stars watermelon, again, is from M.I. Gardner, which most of my seeds, as you can tell, are from M.I. Gardner because the price is so good. The Moon and Stars watermelon is a unique watermelon. It's one of the sweetest watermelons that M.I. Gardner, according to them, that they've tried to date. It's very meaty as well. The vine yields only 3 to 4 melons during the growth season, but it says this fruit can be 20 to 30 pounds. So this is the only large watermelon that I'm going to grow. 85 days to harvest. And what makes this so unique is that the melons are green with yellow dots. So that's like the stars. And each melon will have one large yellow dot, which would be the moon. And that's why they call it moon and stars. Hopefully this one will grow well for me. That's it. Those are all of my summer vegetables. Part 1 has all of my cucumbers and beans that I'll be starting, and part 2 focuses on all of my melons and my squash. Thank you for joining me for this update. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it that you can use in your garden as well. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. So please subscribe to the channel if you're getting any useful information. In the comments, leave me ideas of other content you would like me to bring for you. I have enjoyed creating this content for you today. And until next time, I just want to say thank you again for joining me. Have a blessed, wonderful day. Bye-bye.